All right, good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone doing? So my name is Justin King. I'm with VMware, and I'm part of the technical marketing team. And what that really means, it's not a fluff. I don't put spin on anything. I have technical qualities where I use to enable new features, new technologies around my area of expertise, which obviously is vCenter. This session was a very popular session in San Francisco. We were talking about 5.5 stuff. It was the first session we had, so it was really a glimpse into the follow-on sessions with all the new information, the updates, with single sign-on and things like that. So it was kind of well received, not only because it was the first one to give the information out there, but it's the first thing that we touch when we go to a new release, right? We have to start somewhere, and usually that starting point, with the exceptions of VCD. And in certain places View. vCenter is typically the first thing that you're going to touch from an upgrade. So I'm not going to deliver this session where I tell you how to do an upgrade step by step, but it's more of an eye-opener. What are the things to think about as I go through this process? What's involved with that process, and kind of just make some awareness so you can define and create your own plan as you go forward and upgrade. This is obviously part of a two-part series. We have, I'll introduce Josh in a second, but Josh will be back with the ESX side of this, part 2. Is that tomorrow?
It's right after this session, actually.
Actually, right after this, do you know which room that's in?
Down the hall.
Okay, A1 I think it was, or A3. So there'll be a follow-on, the second part to this. But let me, Josh, you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, thank you. So my name is Josh Gray. I currently work in a different role than I've interacted with Justin before. I'm a senior solutions architect now, but my previous experience was in our support division. I've worked there for a good 6 years, where I like to say I balance Justin out in our presentations and keep him honest in things he says.
Because we have lovely experiences with 5.1, right? We had spent a lot of time, a lot of tears together going through the 5.1, and it was the same with me and Josh.
Definitely.
Josh on the support side, obviously. So what I'm going to do here is just kind of pick up the overview. This is really what we're going to kind of go through and discuss. We've added a few things into this different from San Francisco. Primarily is the vCenter Appliance. And the vCenter Appliance has some, we want to build more adoption around the appliance, and doing upgrades or fresh install upgrades. We're going to talk in detail about that, but that's kind of been added specifically in to cover that area. But I just kind of wanted to get a general overview of where everyone is at today. So who's running 5.5 in production today? Got one hand at the back there. Two hands, a couple of hands. Okay. 5.1. So about 50% of the room. How about 5.0? Oh. What about 4.1? We're going to get there. Obviously, we're running out of versions here in a second. But the 4.0? Okay, what about 2.5? We got a couple at the back there, so we still have people using 2.5. So we need to get you talking to our VMware salespeople, because we need to get you up to the newer versions. And obviously there's great reasons too. And so we're not going to go through the highlights of the 5.5 release, all the new features and technologies, but we're going to go through the steps involved of getting you to a 5.5 in production. We came through this last year with 5.1. We introduced new technologies in 5.1, single sign-on. We love single sign-on, right? Everyone spent a lot of time on that. Well, the good news is it's no longer an issue. We fixed it, and we'll talk on that as well. But the first thing we're going to go into, we've talked roughly about what we're going to go through on this session, and we're going to cover VUM and vCenter primarily. And then Josh, as I said, with a colleague of mine, will continue this after this session. In there, so here we go. These slides, every one of you in this room should have bookmarked, because if whatever we say, I am in marketing, so I can go off the beaten track, but you can't quote me on that, because everything falls in here. If it's not in these links, under the matrix links, in the documentation, this is kind of our source of truth here. And so I'll let, these slides will be available obviously after the show, but I'll let take some pictures there. So, for the few at the back that had 2.5 And in general, most of us, as we got with vCenter, this is what we look at when we see vCenter. We look at the application and we look at the database. This was when it was nice. This was when things were simple. I could get on and do my real job, being an administrator in the environment, so to speak. I had nothing else to worry about. But VMware is evolving. We're inheriting technologies. We're purchasing technologies, evolving new technologies. Where do we put them? Well, there's a vCenter pretty much everywhere we go. Let's throw it on vCenter. So vCenter is getting much bigger. In 5.0, we had the web client. Now, most of you didn't use this in 5.0 because in 5.0, it wasn't very intuitive. It kind of sucked unless you were a help desk type of person using it for VM access or VM administration. We teased you by showing you everything, but you couldn't do anything in storage. You couldn't do anything with networking other than view it as read-only configuration. In 5.1, we obviously updated that, but these are the components that we're looking at from up till 5.0 before we even go for an upgrade. I'm going to share some information with you with the 5.5 that you've not seen publicized anywhere on VMware, and I've just told you if it's not on there, it's not the truth, but I will have it on the VMware blog, hopefully end of this week, if not early next week. But with SSO and with the web client, you can upgrade to 5.5, and if necessary, stage your upgrading of the vCenters so they are backwards compatible. Or if you are staying behind a release because of whatever reason, you can go from 5.0 to 5.1, but use the SSO and web client in 5.5. And there's a lot of reasons why you want to use those technologies. Obviously, from a VMware standpoint, we want to move everything up to the same level, the 5.5 stack. It makes it easier. You get all the optimizations, things like that. But if you have multiple vCenters, you can obviously stage these upgrades. And so with these components in 5.0, you know, vCenter, regardless of what you read on the web, vCenter is not stateless. There are configurations, there are components that are part of the installation on the vCenter server itself. It's not in the database. It's not the same case of taking a database. We've got our SSL certificates. We've got our Atom components. Now, you may be thinking, well, Atom, that's only installed if I use Linux mode. That is incorrect. Atom is used for a standalone vCenter and houses the licensing. It houses the roles, the custom roles that you may create, or the defined ones that we provide, and the permissions for users against those roles as well. So that is on the vCenter server itself. Then we have the database. You know, the database can be quite big. We estimate roughly 15% of the database is VC configuration. The other 85% is historical information, statistics, performance metrics, things like that. And the database can obviously get quite big. We have jobs and everything. But what I'm trying to do here is just build awareness on what we have to start with. And then obviously with the web client, we have plugins, we have server-side settings, things like that. How will they be handled with an upgrade? Will they be compatible? What if I'm going from a 5.0 environment to a 5.5? I've not used the web client yet. So I've got all of these desktop plugins. Are they available for the web client and things like that? Because in 5.1 we introduced an update to the web client where we had full functionality, and we've maintained that in 5.5. So the web client is the go-to client for administrating vCenter server or your vSphere environment. And we want you to utilize that. But if those plugins aren't there, you've got to realize that I've either got to get onto that vendor, give them some pressure to get those plugins updated, or I'm going to be using two clients. And I know once you open up that desktop client, you're probably never going to go back to that web client until the next day or something like that. But the new functionality introduced for 5.1 and 5.5, the new technologies, etc., are only available in the web client. So then we obviously have single sign-on for those of you, the half the room that's on 5.1 in the environment, and the inventory service. What do these contain? You know, well, single sign-on is not a broker. It's not a gateway to my Active Directory or my Open LDAP configuration. We have the ability to create users and groups and policies in there. So if I want to start over, then I can discard that and go straight to the new SSO. But if I've configured a lot of this information, I've spent those hours getting 5.1 up and running with SSO in the various configurations that we had out there for 5.1. You know, if I need to maintain this, then I've got to handle these configurations as well. And then inventory service. The inventory service is one of those performance enhancements to help read-only access queries have a faster response time. Most of the stuff that you're doing in the web client or even in the thick client, is read-only. You're not changing attributes, objects, things like that. You're just reviewing which VMs are on this host, what's the cluster configuration, things like that. And so when you do that, we can remove that processing from VPXD, the core vCenter process itself, and use the inventory cache to provide that same information.
So in the past, you may have heard of it referred to as the white screen of death. In the desktop client, when you do certain operations, it just seems to pause and everything's just clear. It's white. So inventory service was introduced to help alleviate that, remove the processing from VPXD into its own service. That's why in the web client, when you type in a search, everything pops up really quick because it's coming from this inventory service.
Yep. And it allows vCenter to do what it was designed to do, you know, collect and process the stats, make DRS recommendations, things like that. But also with 5.1, we introduced with the inventory service a new technology called tagging. Anyone using custom attributes in their environment? Quite a few hands. So custom attributes are still there. They're only managed with the desktop client. But for the future, we want to replace custom attributes with this technology called tags or tagging. Tagging allows us to define any sort of metadata similar to custom attributes, but has more flexibility. And tagging, you create a tag, and then you can assign tags to multiple objects. An object can have multiple tags itself, and it helps you retrieve information or organize information. One of the limitations it helps you alleviate is objects in a folder. You can only put a virtual machine object or an object of any sort can only be part of one folder. So how do I manage, you know, the separation between, say, department or location and things like that? I have multiple folders. Well, you would actually use tags and be able to use tags for searching on to get that information. But the key point why I'm highlighting what tags are is because you may not be using them today, because we've not made it too easy to get them into the system. It's a manual process to go in and create and assign them. We're doing some updates with Power CLI to do that. But the key part here, tags are stored in the inventory service cache. So they're not in the database. So if you're going to, you know, if you've gone through the time today and you've done tags, you don't want to lose all of that information. So we have a KB that goes through the backup and restore for those tags. So, you know, these are the items that we want you to be aware of, because we're going to go into this whole upgrade scenario, and you know, I don't want to lose anything. I want to be better than where I was today. You know, I want to keep everything I have and be with the latest and greatest and things like that. Anything to add?
Oh yeah, actually, I was going to say one more thing, but I don't want to waste too much time. No, it's good. It's good. So in my new world, I'm exposed to all kinds of new software that I wasn't using before in support. And when he brings up tagging, it's really good to let people know that the metadata that VCD and VCAC uses are separate from this. They're stored in 3 separate places today. So if you use VCD and you're using the tagging capability within that, that is a separate place, even though it may be the same underlying object. Okay?
Okay. Thank you. So the good thing is, there's no new technologies in 5.5. We kind of went through the last release, a couple of Band-Aid fixes, but we've now gone through and basically not redone the 5.1 release, but we've made solid quality products now. We've turned the other issues, we've got rid of them, turned them around. And with doing that, we've not introduced anything new to let you guys get a bit more credibility or faith with VMware again and the solutions that you're using in-house. Okay? All right, so with the 5.5 release, we obviously have to know how we can get there. What can we do direct in-place upgrades? So 4.0, 4.1, 5.0, we can go straight forward to 5.5. If you're on 4.0, it's got to be 64-bit operating system. The documentation for going to 4.1 still is used today to go from 32-bit OS to 64-bit OS. So go through that if necessary. It's probably easier to start over than to go from a 32-bit 4.0 and then do a conversion and an in-place upgrade. We don't support XP for vCenter. Anyone running vCenter on XP, I didn't ask this, but I'm still looking for that one customer. So, nope. So here's an interesting point as well. We're going to talk in a second about in-place upgrades versus fresh installs and the pros and cons of each and things like that. Up until 5.0, we had a migration strategy where you could take your existing version that you're on today and you could deploy a brand new vCenter on a new machine and then do a migration of the configuration and the database, etc. We have not changed or updated that policy or had that capability since 5.0. And so when we do a fresh install, it literally is a start over. We're obviously going to talk about this in a second, but we do not have a migration story from going from prior to 5.0 to 5.5 on a new machine. If it's something that you are in a 4x environment, you can do the 4x to 5.0 migration and then in place 5.0 up to 5.5 if necessary, if that's a path you wanted to take. As well as we have the vCenter Appliance. vCenter Appliance is getting a lot more attractive. It would be a use case for it. Fresh installs is obviously something there. We do not have a migration plan in place today from Windows to the appliance. That's going to be a fresh start as well. And the 5.5 can obviously manage the same versions 4x up to 5.5 in 5.5 clusters within the environment. So hopefully no one's on. Anyone using ESX2 and 3 still? The guys with the app? We've got a couple of hands. We really got to get some salespeople talking to them, you know. All right, so the big thing here is last year we were up on stage talking about vCenter and all the new components, all these great technologies that you hadn't touched yet, and then when you did, you obviously had a bad taste, you know, primarily with single sign-on. We also told you to distribute everything. We told you to put each component on its own virtual machine and distribute all of the components out of that. What you have told us in the last year, not only SSO has been a pain, but also distributing these VMs, we like the idea, but there's an extra level of complexity. I'm having a single application span multiple virtual machines. And from a management perspective, that's a bit more challenging. From an operational standpoint, that's more challenging. And from an availability standpoint, there's more at risk. I've got multiple machines. There's dependency on services and things like that. So taking backups and restoring is problematic too. So this year, I'm going to call it the year of the single VM, but this year we're reversing that message, and we want you know, a lot of these components aren't too resource hungry. They can reside on the same box, but because we have these components, the minimum requirements are going up. Now, obviously, CPU and memory is getting cheaper, but that doesn't necessarily reflect I'm updating the host in my data center. And so you do not want to starve the resources for vCenter Server itself. We don't want you to deploy a monster VM, but we don't want you to starve. You're not going to do this with the default 4 gigs of RAM and 2 CPUs. You are going to need to up them. So this is straight out of the documentation from one of the links we saw earlier. For a simple install, which basically means everything on one machine, we're going to need 12 gigs of RAM and 4 CPUs to run vCenter. Okay? So I don't have any sizing requirement on this, but then if I go to the next slide here, this is really what I recommended was. But before you all start shouting at me and say, hey, we're not going to do that, it's for 400 hosts, 4,000 VMs. So I can probably guarantee most of you fall under that. There's probably a couple of handfuls of customers going beyond that. But this is kind of just an idea to be thinking. You know, if you're at 200 hosts, 2,000 virtual machines, you know, you could pretty much, you know, bring us down to 16 and 4 or something like that and be okay. And from my experience talking with many customers, the 16 and 4 has been a good round number for the size of inventory that they have. But we want to highlight, don't skimp on the resources for vCenter. We have dropped 2003 from the host. So if we're on 2003, we're going to have to do some upgrades. If we're on 5.1 and we have 2003 as the operating system, even doing a service pack can have some impact on the SSO service. The SSO service in 5.1 used a logbox, so it has pieces of the configuration and the OS tied to the operation aspect of that service. And if that changes, i.e. change the service pack, some of those attributes will change. It will prevent you from starting VC. So you really need to, 2008 and 2008 SP1 is also unsupported. We need to get you to 2008 SP2 to start your 5.5 plan before you can proceed with vCenter at that point. We do support 2012. 2012 was added with update 1 of 5.1. I can't remember when that was, but it was about earlier in the year, I think March time frame. R2 is about to ship, or if not, has already shipped. Obviously, we wait till GA from new operating systems before we can add that into support. We've done some testing. There are some differences between R2 and standard 2012, primarily with the Atom components. And we will, in the next release, be an update release. We will have, obviously, R2 added at that time. The same links again. All right. So, Josh, I'm going to let you take this one. Talk about the new install.
When we talk about a new install versus an upgrade, it's really the recommendation for the vCenter side is, do you have the opportunity to do a fresh install, right? So with the host, it's a little bit different. We'll talk about that in our next conversation. But these days, with all the underlying software, you really have to do an upgrade. If you have View, if you have BCD, you really are forced to do an upgrade because you have no way of migrating those objects to that new environment. So a new install is best when you have the opportunity to do it. We would recommend it, right? So because you are going to lose that historical data. Some environments really require that. A lot of manual work, time involved, but you could get a good gain out of that, right? So doing upgrades, you carry over all that stuff, and all that advanced software on there will continue to work, right?
And the key thing to really remember or note here is how well do you know the environment? Did you take it over from someone else? Because if you're doing that fresh install, you've got to recreate the storage environments, not reconfigure the storage, but reconnect all of the storage devices. You've got to do the same thing for networking as well. And so if that's all carryover, how well do you know that? How well have you changed? If you want to do an architectural review and redesign the architecture of your vSphere environment, a fresh install is a good way of achieving that. And it helps, obviously, give that clean start. But as we kind of highlighted, it's not always feasible. I may have mandates where I have to have, I'm in a financial sector or in health and insurance or something like that, where I'm mandated to require those statistics, so I have to do an in-place upgrade. Just by a quick show of hands, who favors a fresh install when they can?
For the management software.
For the vCenter server. Okay. I'm a big fan of that, but the point we wanted to highlight is it's not always feasible. Okay. There we go. So back to the simple days, back to 4.0, 5.0. We had an ISO image and we had a client to install. Then we came out with 5.1 and 5.5, no new technologies, remember. Excuse me. We have all of these components, and we then also have the vCenter Server Appliance. Don't treat these as individual servers. Treat them as components that are tied together to the same server. And then the vCenter Server Appliance has everything. The pros with the vCenter Server Appliance are it's an OVA I download, it's a template, I deploy it into the environment. I go through a very simple configuration wizard, setting up IP, a host name. I recommend setting the FQDN in your DNS before deploying this. That will help with the certificates generation that go on as you enable and disable features on the vCenter server. But then once I'm at the vCenter Server Appliance, which has the ability to handle the same load and the same solutions as its Windows counterpart, with the exception of IPv6, vCenter Server Heartbeat, and linked mode. If you don't need any of those three, the appliance is a great solution, because once you're on the appliance, updates and upgrades, two very different scenarios, are handled with extreme ease and simplicity. Meaning if there's an update that comes out, it can download that update automatically, and then you can go in and say install it, or you can even say do the whole install automatically for you. There will be a reboot typically with an update 1 release, say, of 5.5. Or if we go, we're here next year and we're talking 5.6, 5.7. It could be 6.0, I can't tell you, I don't know. But the next release of vCenter, you just download that new template. No setting of configuration, no IP address, no hostname or anything. You just power it on, and then you go in and basically take a key from one and put it in the other to create a trust between the current production VC and the new freshly deployed one, it will then take all of that information, all of that configuration, and transfer it into that new appliance. And then I'm upgraded to the latest and greatest appliance at that point. There's none of this going through requirements on the OS side. There's none of this going through configuration, external configurations, things like that. So once you get on the appliance, it's really easy to go forward, and there's definitely a strategy that VMware has in place to move all of you into the appliance. But we do have some work to do there, and we'll talk about that in a second. So with the new 5.5, we have a nice white screen. It was blue last year. So, but the key points here is we have a simple install, which is a chain of all of those components. Why would you use a simple install? Well, I want to install all the components, the SSO component, the web client, the inventory service, and vCenter on a single machine with the default settings. This has still requires, in my opinion, and you can quote me on this, still some work to do, because you cannot change the destination. And so if you know, who installs everything on the C drive? And I'm not trying to point anyone out, but you know, not a lot of people. It's perfectly acceptable, but we typically have been told to separate OS from the application. And I'm not mandating that we do that, but it's typically something that we followed. And the simple install maintains the C drive location today. But we've added the web client primarily because of the issues with 5.1. I can guarantee you that you will not need to use the web client to configure SSO with the 5.5 release. This was a change that was done towards the end of the release cycle, where we still had the 5.1, we had an update to the 5.1 SSO before we switched over to a brand new built service. But this is kind of VMware's recommendation, but as I said, it's still got some work to do. What you're really going to find yourself doing is using the custom install, the individual installers, and run these, because you're going to have a few extra configuration options when you do this, being that you can put them, you know, we want you to keep it on a single machine, but we still support the distribution. If you're comfortable moving SSO off, moving the web client onto separate machines, maybe putting them behind load balancers or something like that, we still support you with that. But we really feel the simplified message and the management is greater with a single VM. There's not much yielded in benefit from distributing them, but if you do want to distribute them, you can do this. Do not distribute the inventory service from vCenter. You always want to keep those two together. There's a lot of chit-chat going on. Do not want to put it on the wire, okay? But if you want to customize the location, put it in the D drive, the E drive, something like that. You're going to have to go through the individual installers. Or if you're adding additional or advanced features, one of these would be, when we get to single sign-on in a second, single sign-on, we basically create a security domain. It's called vSphere.local. Those on 5.1 may be familiar with the system-domain. We've made it FQDN compliant. And so vSphere.local is the security domain that you're going to register your solutions into. And if you're adding multiple vCenters, you really only want one vSphere.local. We don't give you the option to change that. And so for a single pane of management on the SSO side, you set one up to create that domain, and then add additional vCenters. You're going to select the option, and you would need the custom installer to add those additional instances of SSO local to the vCenter into the same security domain. And obviously, if you do the custom installer, we do have a set order. There are dependencies required. And obviously, single sign-on, everything needs single sign-on once you get to it, so it needs that information. We do that first. Then we have the web client, then we have the inventory service, and then vCenter asks for all of these components when you go through the installer to upgrade your environment. Where do we want you to go? So something that we got hit on a lot last year was we gave you all this flexibility with vCenter. You could distribute it, you could do this, you could do that. There was this configuration, that configuration, but we never gave you any true guidance. And so this year we've made it a strong forefront to position where we want you to be using our solutions, how we want you to configure your environment. And so obviously we've got the single VM model here. We have the components on there. Obviously we've talked about the sizing of running this environment. But this can handle max scale if sized correctly. We can still handle 1,000 hosts, 10,000 virtual machines with this model. Obviously the only separation here is the database. If you're using the vCenter appliance, you could actually use the embedded database and have a true single VM. And that would allow you to have everything self-contained at that point. But obviously, you know, typically we still have the database on a separate cluster which we did add with 5.5. We do support Microsoft failover clustering and Oracle RAC with the 5.5 release of vCenter. But what if I have multiple VCs? Well, they could be in the same site. They could be distributed, DR sites or global presence, for example. Well, this is how I want you to set it up. You're going to have the same single VM for each VC instance, but we've got that green bar which represents the single sign-on security domain. That is the vSphere.local. If you don't do this, you're going to have, each one will have its own vSphere.local with its own security, which means that could be a management headache because you've changed the password, but then you're on another VC and it's like, hey, the change hasn't been reflected because they're not replicating at that point. The idea here, obviously, with the single sign-on, the new single sign-on, we do replicate any of the configuration. So if we add Active Directory, that's replicated to all instances in the domain, the security domain. The users, the groups, the policies, all of that is in there. And if you set up a second SSO instance, before you can even log in, it will automatically be updated with that configuration and things like that. So we took all of the pain out of 5.1 and threw it in the trash. And we've got this nice simplified model for SSO in the environment. It does not provide failover. If your SSO instance goes down, you're still registered with that local instance. The reason we want it local is because if SSO is down, probably VC is going to be down as well. You don't want to be dependent on a remote single sign-on server. You certainly do not want to go across the WAN. But we recommend obviously keeping SSO local because everything is self-contained at that point from you looking at it from backup, restore, and things like that. You will need to use this for linked mode. Those familiar with 5.1 had multi-sites where we had to do all this manual work to set it up and maintain this. All of that's gone. The automatic replication built in provides that. Linked mode does require this model for them to be in the same security domain, which is what we're telling you or recommending to you to utilize. And obviously availability, that really comes down to your own requirements. What's your RPO, RTO? You know, we have vSphere HA, we have vCenter Server Heartbeat. In 5.5, it's also good to know VDP, and I think it comes with the standard licensing, but I'm not sure 100% on that. But VDP has been updated, VMware Data Protection. Before, you would back up a virtual machine, do a disk level backup with VDP, and you would go to VC and say, hey, I want to restore this virtual machine, tell me where to put it. So you couldn't use it for vCenter, but with 5.5 and VDP, you can actually specify a host to restore directly to. So you could use VDP for backing up and restoring the vCenter as well. Okay. But what if I'm a large customer and no one wants to admit they're small, everyone wants to say they're large. But if you have 8 or more vCenters in the same physical location, you know, we've got all of these SSO instances, they're going to be replicating, talking to each other, things like that. We don't want that to continue across the WAN. We want to kind of control that. And we do give you tools to control the replication. But if you have more than 8 or more, we actually recommend to help soften up some of that communication in the data center itself to go through a centralized model that we have here. I can also put the web client on there as well because the web client is needed to administer SSO. And it also gives me a single URL to access all of my VCs in the environment as well. So this is, for the larger customer, the larger ISP customer where they have many vCenter servers, this is how we want you to deploy. Availability is absolutely key if you were to do this model. The reason being is what happens when SSO goes down? My VCs are still going to work, but I've lost all management of that. I cannot log in, I cannot run anything at that point in time. And so I absolutely need to keep my SSO server highly available if I do this because all these VCs and my management is lost at that point. How are we doing for time?
About halfway.
About halfway? So let's see what we've got here. So those of you that were on 5.1, we do support the in-place upgrade of the pain that you went through last year, setting up all these configurations, SSO HA, SSO multi-site, for example. We support directly upgrading those to 5.5 and keeping them in those configurations. However, with this new technology, this multi-master SSO technology, it's actually, there's better ways to use it. And we've obviously seen the reference architecture of how we want you to deploy vCenter server. And obviously, we can see some of those points here just reiterated. For using that with SSO, obviously keeping SSO local to the vCenter, it's going to be replicated, so make sure it's part of the same authentication domain. And it's relatively easy. This is something that's come up quite often, and I am planning to put something out on the blog about this. But if you have gone through, Justin told you last year to distribute everything, so you went and upgraded to 5.1 and distributed all of your components, it's not too difficult to rein all that back in and compile it back to a single virtual machine. What you would do if I just go back to the graphic here, if you have this, say this model here, and you want to bring it into the local, you would, if you've been using SSO, you would upgrade this SSO to 5.5. It is backwards compatible. I can stay at that if I wanted to and stage it over several weekends if necessary. Reasons for doing that, maybe I'm using Vue. Vue is not ready yet for 5.5, so I may be holding back a version with that, but I want to get SSO updated, and I can have mixed versions as I've highlighted here. But then what the next step would be, I would go to the vCenter server that I would want to upgrade with a local SSO, and I would deploy an SSO instance local on that machine. I would make sure it's part of the vSphere.local domain that's already been created with the central SSO. And then as I upgrade the inventory service, I will point it to the local SSO and not the remote one. And the same with vCenter, and point it to the local. So then vCenter and all its components will start using the local SSO. That SSO is a copy of the central one at that point. And once I've done all my VCs, I could actually retire that central VM at that point, delete from disk or archive or something like that.
That's really the beauty of the multi-master replication that we have in this version. It was a pain in 5.1.
Yeah.
So I'm sure many people here know that.
You agree with us that it was a pain, right? So this is just some quick, showing some diagrams of what it looks like for you today and what it looks like with 5.5. Obviously going from a 4X or 5.0 environment, you're going to be on a single machine anyway, because we didn't support distribution. We would have these components added. Architecture is basically unchanged, so if you're planning on upgrading and you're in a 4X or 5.0 environment, there's nothing wrong with 5.1. We have a relatively stable release now with the update 1B that's out there. But it's best, I would recommend jumping and going on to 5.5 because everyone else has had the heartache. Say thank you for going through the pain and skip to the new stuff. Okay, so I would recommend jumping to 5.5 if you're planning to go to 5.1. If you are mandated because of various reasons, do the SSO and the web client at 5.5 and keep vCenter at 5.1 if you have to. Okay. So if you're in a 5.1, we have obviously the SSO database, we have the VC database on the server, and the three components. When we go to that, we actually get rid of the SSO database. We do not delete the database. We're going to transfer or migrate it into the SSO. SSO has a embedded store, and all that contents, which is your users, your groups, your policies, are going to be migrated into that store, and then you can delete or archive the database. So architecture is unchanged if you followed the guidelines that we did set out in 5.1. Most of you probably didn't because that guidelines came very late, in fact, probably less than 3 months ago. If you have the HA configuration in 5.1, then obviously we get rid of that shared database completely, and this is actually an active-active model. So if you have multiple vCenters and want a centralized model, this is one way of providing a level of availability. And then if you had the multi-site model where we had local databases and we had to do the manual replication, when we go to 5.5, we get rid of all of those databases, and all the instances became a master, a peer of each other in the security domain where everything is replicated. So there's nothing to do on the SSO side for a linked mode configuration, just other than keeping it all part of the same vSphere.local. So I'm going to let you do some talking. Linked mode.
Linked mode. I wasn't ready to talk about linked mode, Justin.
Okay.
What are we going to talk about?
So linked mode is a technology for sharing or providing a single pane of glass view across multiple VCs. You either love it or hate linked mode, depending on your experience. How many people are using linked mode today? So about 20% of the room. So linked mode obviously depends on, there's the Atom component that we use for the licensing and the roles, and we do the, Atom is Active Directory Application Manager, so it's like an AD for applications. And we use that for the replication between VCs where we can join VCs together to trust each other and manage from a single client multiple virtual centers at that point. The problem when you come to upgrading, and it's been something that we keep trying to remove, but it still persists in 5.5. Linked mode has to have all VCs at the same level. So you're going to have to, when you do an upgrade of your vCenters that are in linked mode, you're going to have to unjoin them from the linked mode group, do the upgrade, and then when you've got another one or another two or all of them unlinked or upgraded to 5.5, then you can go through the same process of rejoining them back in to the linked mode group and get that single pane of glass view again. But the two things that really cause the most pain with linked mode is DNS. DNS has to be rock solid. In fact, DNS is more and more critical now in 5.5 because the SSO components use Kerberos. And we all know what happened when Microsoft came out with Active Directory and switched it from LDAP to Kerberos. We had a lot of environmental issues with AD. So AD needs to be, DNS needs to be rock solid in the environment for not just SSO, but also for your linked mode communications and network time synchronization. They don't need to be in the same time zones, but they need to be on the same time source format.
So Justin mentioned it, and it is up on the slide, but it is worth really pressing the point that there's a lot of customer pain that when you don't unjoin the linked mode groups, because the installer doesn't stop you from doing that. It'll let you continue on with the install if your VCs are linked. So a lot of bad things can happen. A lot of support tickets are generated by that to clean up the mess from that.
As I said, we've been trying to make it support mixed mode, but it typically gets the first thing it gets the chopping block when we come short for time to get a release out the door. But we are re-engineering linked mode with a new technology in the future. I can't share any details on specifics, but linked mode, customers like the ability to manage multiple vCenter servers and search across multiple vCenter servers. Definitely in a cloud type of environment, it definitely makes sense, and that's something that we're working on to make it easier for you with that.
So we offer something called the host agent pre-upgrade checker. How many people here use it? Have you used it in the past? That's good. That's good. That's more than I expected. So, oh, geez, I'm so sorry. Getting over a cold. This is something that we've had around for a good couple versions now. That it looks like this. It's a Windows application. It checks all your hosts for a number of items. And the whole goal in life is to make sure the hosts don't go disconnected after the upgrade, because that's a really bad thing if they're all remote from you. You know, if you have ILO or DRAC, you know, if you have a remote way into it, you can recover from that in one way, but it's going to be a pain if you have a huge environment. So we check a number of things, like the host is reachable currently, right? Important to know that from your starting point. Disk space, network is functioning, file system, right? We check a lot of stuff on the file system so that we can estimate that a good intact upgrade will happen at the end of it. So it's there for you. Please use it. Maybe it'll avoid support incident.
And what happens when you attach a host to vCenter? We install an agent, and when we do an upgrade from a previous version to a newer version, we update that agent. And as Josh alluded to, we don't want that host to get disconnected in that process, because that becomes unmanaged at that point, which also becomes unused resource. And so we want to make sure that all of your environment is functioning to be able to, when we do that upgrade process, to be able to kind of successfully go through that whole agent update process without any issues. So we've got the vCenter Server Appliance. So this has come up, you know, we talked a little bit about in place and we talked about fresh install. If you were one like me, I prefer to do a fresh install. Obviously there's some gotchas with the environment that I'm in, but if I'm going to a fresh install, this is a great time to start looking at the vCenter Server Appliance. We've upped the scale now, so if I have less than 100 hosts or up to 100 hosts, I can even get away from a database. I can use the embedded database now and support 100 hosts, 3,000 virtual machines. There was a lot of mixed information. We were trying to go higher, but we had to lock it in at a number for the release to get that. But obviously, end goal, our future roadmap is to match the maximums of an external database with the embedded database. But that's obviously got work to do. And so for many customers, obviously, we have the ability. But how do I get the appliance? Well, it's the same license for the vCenter Server license you have today. You get the option to download the ISO or the OVA for the appliance. We have, in the US, We have the defense, the government, I forget what the actual full qualified name is, but the Department of Defense have these security requirements where they provide a STIG, which is a set of security compliancy. And with the appliance, we have some scripts that are inside the vCenter Server appliance that you can run, and it will put you in compliance with the STIG, so you are in compliance with the US government at that point. So obviously in EMEA, there'll be different security requirements, but it's nice to know that if I'm meeting US security, although we could probably debate that with the recent couple of months, but if you can meet the US level of security, then it more than likely will fall into something that you can abide to with your own policies as well. So you understand where I'm going with that. So, but obviously, what's the key drivers? You know, it's a bit of a hard push to say, hey, I'm saving a Windows license. Most of us have, you know, Microsoft enterprise licensing, so we have, you know, either maximum discounts or it's only a couple of $100 for an OS license. So it's really hard to really push that one. But the idea of the appliance is it's so easy to deploy. I can be up and running in minutes. I've talked about the updates. I've talked about the upgrades. It really simplifies the whole time involved of managing vCenter to allow you to use that time to be utilized for other areas, you know, working with the storage or clustering and things like that. So the idea is to take your time away from vCenter maintenance and administration duties and use that time more wisely, okay? But as I said, we cannot migrate. It can only be used for a fresh install, so that is a fresh start. Networking, storage, things like that need to be applied. We have a Oracle support as the external database. Microsoft does have a SQL driver today. It's in a preview state, so it's not supported. We've tested it, and we've kind of had some success with it. But until Microsoft puts it out there as a supported product, we can't offer that level of compatibility. Is anyone here interested in using the appliance with a SQL Server backend database? Okay. So I'm collecting data. You may have seen some tweets from a couple of colleagues of mine, and we're trying to gather this information. How many would use an embedded database for their environment? Okay, so a few more hands there. And the idea with the embedded database is we don't want you to be DBAs. We want you to be virtual machine or virtual administrators, cloud administrators. Give the DBAs to someone that likes doing all that stuff. And so that's the idea of the driver with the embedded database. Okay. Obviously, just a recap, no linked mode with the appliance, no IPv6. Is anyone required to use IPv6 in their environment? Is that from a software and hardware perspective or just from a software? No? Okay. And then no linked mode, no vCenter Server Heartbeat. All of these are planned in the roadmap in a future release to be added to the appliance. We just don't have it today in 5.5. Update Manager. I'm going to do the reverse on this one now, because who does not use Update Manager? We got one down here. At least you're honest. So we're in the plans of a future product to replace VUM, but we want to deliver the right product at the right time, and it's going to do a lot more than just host updates. There was another session earlier today with the product manager for this team, and Kate gave some details. But basically, we're working on this replacement. But in the meantime, VUM has been a little thorn in the side because everyone uses it, and we're working on something else. We've not really end-of-lifed it, but we lost heart in it and put our resources into this other basket. And with that in mind, we had issues with the web client not having a plugin available to be able to do that, so you were forced to use the desktop client at that point. But we know everyone, except the one, is using it in this room. And so we have an update for the 5.5. It's relatively a minor update, and we support 64-bit OS in-place upgrades. Now, if you have a VM that you're going to be downloading new patches, new versions, and you need to extend that repository, you cannot change the destination when you do an in-place upgrade. And so you will have to either use disk extension utilities to provide more space there, or just do a fresh install. And the reason why I say just do a fresh install is because you could do some cleaning out of the database. VUM is still limited, one VUM per VC. and there is a database involved there, so I can do some house cleaning with that. But I'm going to keep all my scheduled tasks and operations. I will remove the baselines. They will need to be recreated, but you're going to do that anyway because you're at a new version. But if you do a fresh install, yes, you have some of that to reset up, but you also have the ability to change the destination or the repository location and things like that. There are tricks you can do on the back end. I'm obviously represent VMware, so I can't say any unsupported stuff. But there are some tricks out there that you could also do to use with that as well. But VUM, as I said, is updated, and then once you've done the vCenter, the idea with this slide is a handoff to Josh's session next, where you would go in and go through the whole upgrade process with ESX. So that's the upgrade story. As I said, we want to give you a direct, this is step-by-step how to do your upgrade. It's just an eye-opener on what am I got in my environment, what am I using, and give you some food for thought to plan that accordingly. Obviously, follow us on Twitter, but I want to thank you for coming to the session. And if there's any questions, we have a couple of mics on the side, so if there's any hands up, we can take some questions. We have about 10 minutes before we're out of time. No questions? Come on. And for those that are leaving, please do fill out the surveys. Let us know how you receive this. We can only make this better with your feedback and your impact. So tell us what you like, what you didn't like, and we can take that feedback. But thank you for everyone. But we had a question right here.
I'd like to ask if I want to upgrade my single server installation, just write it is, then I can also use a simple install as an upgrade, or should I use the
Okay, so the question is, if I have a single virtual machine or vCenter today, virtual machine architecture, and I want to do the upgrade, can I use the simple installer? The simple installer will detect those components and will update them to 5.5. Obviously, if they're on different drives, it will obviously keep them on those separate drives at that point, and you'll be able to use the simple installer to do that, yes. Okay. Thank you. But if you were planning to grow the environment with more vCenters, you would only be able to do it for the first vCenter today. We are trying to reverse this. The simple installer with SSO only allows you to create the first instance in SSO. So if you use simple installer every time, you're going to get a fresh SSO instance. We are going to be changing that, but as it is with the code that's available today, you would have to use the custom installer to add it to an existing vSphere.local.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? I've got a question at the back there, and
Couple.
Yep. It's hard to see with these lights.
About the backup of the appliance, you said that we don't want to be a DBA. You're right, I don't want to be a DBA. So what about the backup? Is it okay to do a backup with VDP, for example? There will be no issue with things going on in the database, in the Postgres database?
I'm not sure I can understand the question. Can you repeat it again?
So the question is, can I do a backup with VDP of the appliance, the vCenter appliance? There will be no issue with the database?
So the question is, I use VDP to back up the appliance, and will there be any issues with the database? And so the answer to that is we want to self-contain it. We actually give you the same tools, whether you're using the appliance or the Windows version of vCenter, to use backup solutions. VDP will obviously take a snapshot of the state of that virtual machine for you to back up, and then obviously restore at that point in time. There is no transactional type of backup with VDP. It's purely the virtual machine as a disk level backup at that point. And the database has, just like with SQL Server, it has some preventative steps to understand what the last transactions were, and if those transactions were completed, and do a little health check on startup of the database services within the appliance as well.
So it's fully supported. There is nothing to do. We just
do we support VDP with the appliance?
No, I mean backing up the appliance with VDP.
With Veeam? I'm sorry, I can't.
So I'm using the vCenter appliance. I want to do a backup, and for that I'm using VDP. Is that okay?
We support VDP. With
Yes,
vSphere.
yes.
Okay.
Yes, sorry, yes. I was
Echoes
reading more than
plus
that,
French.
more into it, but yes. Anything else? Question over here.
What about the cooperation from Update Manager with the VCSA, the appliance? In the history, we had some issues about the versions you are using when you want to contact the Update Manager with the VCSA.
I'm going to let you handle that
What
one,
was the
Josh.
question?
It's the versioning with the VCAC and going from VUM to VCAC.
Yeah.
The versioning.
VUM, the VCAC. What are you alluding to with that?
I want to use Update Manager with the appliance, with the vCenter appliance.
Okay.
And in the history, we had it doesn't work if you use the wrong version of Update Manager with the appliance, and if afterwards, if you're upgrading the appliance, it didn't work anymore, because you have to get every time the correct version of Update Manager. Is that the same in the new one?
Yeah, absolutely. So the question is, if I upgrade, do I have to upgrade VUM as well to the same version of VC to be able to deploy the VUM patches and update hosts? It's still the same scenario. We still need you to get to 5.5 on the VUM side as well as on the VC side for you to do that. So apologies. But that is, as I said, we're working on this new product, which will change a lot of that. And I'll definitely take that scenario back with me.
Okay.
So, thank you.
That's good.
I would like to know if there's a way to, or there's a plan and roadmap to connect a appliance SSO to a Windows vCenter,
Oh, absolutely. We support that today. You could actually enable the appliance and disable or not enable basically the vCenter components. The inventory service needs a little update because we pre-register it before it's deployed in the base template. But you could absolutely deploy SSO and the web client in same or separate appliance virtual machines to be used with the Windows functionality. The only gotcha with the appliance for SSO is it can only be that first SSO. You cannot join it to an existing. So if there's multiple SSO servers, they are going to be separate at that point. They won't be able to replicate between each other. That's the only gotcha that we have with the appliance, but we do support that. Okay, great.
I've got just a clarification on something you said earlier about the...
I'm sorry, I hear a voice.
There
we go.
When you're migrating, if you want to migrate from an old server to a new server, you said that had to be done before you upgraded. Is it possible to do after you upgraded? Or are you saying that once we've gone to 5.5, you can no longer migrate VC from an old server to a new server?
So you want to move to 5.5 from a distributed model, or just to a fresh machine?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the idea is obviously if you're on 5.1, it's basically all your only option is a fresh start, or if you're on 5.0, that's kind of the last where we did. If you're in a 4X environment, which I think is where you're coming from, you can do the migration to a clean install new machine with 5.0. And then in place, you've got the configuration over, but it's relatively clean at that point, and then do an in-place upgrade to 5.5. That's the only way of maintaining that 4X environment.
Right. So once you're on 5.5, you can no longer move to a new server.
That's correct.
Yeah.
We want to build adoption with the appliance. So this is absolutely a migration strategy. It has to come. We just don't have it today.
Sure. And just one other thing is, if you've got two separate installations of Virtual Center with separate SSOs, is there a way to bring them to a shared SSO?
So if you've deployed them today as separate, then obviously you've got the separate management, one for each SSO instance. We do not have the functionality in today's release to be able to say, hey, take this SSO and join it to this one. Post-installation, we can only do it during the installation of SSO. So what you would basically have to do is uninstall SSO, reinstall it afresh, adding it in at that point to the existing SSO, and then you'll basically have have to regenerate the certificates with SSO with the local components. And the easiest thing is that we have a KB that just talks about the re-registration at that point, and it will use the generated.
But the uninstall you're talking about is only one side.
Yeah, the uninstall is only on the second instance, and then you basically just redeploy SSO and then update the registration, because you're going to have, as much as it's going to be using the same name, the SDS is going to be different in there, and so we need to get it'll automatically update the certificates for you if you trust VMware with the self-signed ones, and but you just need to re-register it to get those certificates through for that communication.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Question here. I'm sitting right next to him. Yep. The appliance sounds intriguing. Can it be assumed that a third-party plugin, for instance, NetApp's VSC plugin, will that be available for the appliance? Is that required of anybody who's developing plugins for vCenter, that they work on both?
So the question is, what about third-party solutions? And the example was the NetApp VSC. And the API with the vCenter appliance and the Windows is the same. And so if we're using regular API calls, you'll be able to use the appliance for that. Now, if it's a Windows component, just in our example, we would use VUM, but we could also use the NetApp component too. You know, if it's a Windows service, then that would obviously still have to run on a Windows virtual machine separate to vCenter, but it would be able to communicate to vCenter and give the same functionality. As long as there's not an agent or an executable required locally on that appliance, you'll be good to go.
Then the one other thing is we would miss link mode. Can it be assumed that any future upgrade to that appliance would just link mode would appear all of a sudden, you know, or would that be a complete fresh install?
That's something I would like. The question was, if we do an upgrade, linked mode would just appear. Was that the question?
Yeah, you know, basically, if you if you do take the risk of going onto the appliance now.
Yeah, so when you come to the next version that supports linked mode, that will be automatically enabled through that upgrade, and you wouldn't have to do anything else at that point. Yeah. So unfortunately, we're out of time, so I appreciate everyone staying. There's some great questions. I will be around outside to answer any remaining questions, but thank you, everyone.